Tonight, a ceasefire in limbo. The fragile 14-day truce brokered by Pakistan is under maximum strain, with the White House and Tehran trading rejections of any extension. As the April 22nd deadline looms, the U.S. naval blockade remains in full force, and Iran has just slammed the Strait of Hormuz shut once again, accusing Washington of piracy. Meanwhile, at least 122 journalists have been killed in Gaza in what UN experts are calling a deliberate strategy to silence reporting. And in Lebanon, despite a separate 10-day ceasefire taking effect at midnight, occupation forces are already carrying out massive demolitions and shelling southern villages. Tonight, we ask, is this a real path to de-escalation or simply a tactical pause before a wider war? These questions and more are put to my panel in All 24 News Special shortly. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition. I'm your host, Kirin Fazakari, and before we bring in our guest and start the debate, I invite you to follow this report on the ceasefire brokered by Pakistan on April 8th, which was meant to halt the U.S.-Israeli offensive launched in late February and which was framed as a diplomatic breakthrough. The first high-level engagement between Washington and Tehran in decades, that is. But more than halfway through, the core of disputes remain unresolved. Here's Zahra Frajani.
The confrontation between Iran and the United States is sharpening once again. Tehran has reclosed the Strait of Hormuz only hours after reopening it on Friday, citing the continued American naval blockade on Iranian ports.
The Strait of Hormuz has returned to its previous state after the United States broke its commitment and the naval blockade continued. The Strait of Hormuz will remain under strict control and close monitoring by our armed forces unless the United States guarantees full freedom of navigation for ships traveling to and from Iran. The situation on the Strait of Hormuz has reverted to its previous condition and will remain so as long as Washington does not commit to ensuring the free movement of vessels to and from Iran.
The move was reinforced politically by Iran's first Vice President Mohammad Reza Aref, who said Tehran considers the management of the strait as legal sovereign right, stressing that it will pursue this objective through negotiations or on the ground. The renewed closure was quickly followed by security incidents at sea. Maritime sources reported that Iranian naval units fired at least 2 commercial vessels attempting to cross the strait. Shipping monitors said 2 Indian flagships were forced to retreat after coming under fire, while British maritime authorities reported that Iranian Revolutionary Guard boats opened fire near a tanker and another vessel northeast of Oman. In Washington, President Trump warned Tehran against what he calls attempts to blackmail the United States, vowing a firm response if Iran continues to block the strategic passage. Yet despite the escalation, Trump says talks with Tehran are progressively well and promised an update on negotiations later in the day.
We'll be talking about Iran later. We have very good conversations going on. It's working out very well. They got a little cute, as they have been doing for 47 years. Nobody ever took them on. We took them on. They have no Navy. They have no Air Force. They have no leaders. They have no nothing. Actually, their leaders are, it is regime change. You call that enforced regime change. But we're talking to them. They wanted to close up the strait again, as they've been doing for years. And they can't blackmail us.
However, Tehran signaled no immediate diplomatic breakthrough. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Saeed Khatibzadeh said no date has been set for the next round of talks with Washington, accusing the U.S. of adopting an extreme approach and violating previous commitments. With maritime tensions rising and diplomacy stalled, the Strait of Hormuz is once again emerging as the focal point of the confrontation between Tehran and Washington.
To unpack these fast-moving developments, I'm joined tonight by a distinguished panel. We will be having Dr. Yvonne Ridley, who joins us from Glasgow. She's a renowned journalist, British author, and Middle East commentator, as well as Workers' Party parliamentary candidate Dr. Yvonne will join us shortly. And from Los Angeles is Professor Sierra Knock, U.S. foreign policy analyst and former Donald Trump campaign insider. Professor Knock, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And from London is Dr. Irfan Raja, political analyst and media specialist. Dr. Raja, good to see you and to have you with us again.
Likewise, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And from Dhaka is Dr. Gregory Simons, geopolitical analyst and researcher. Dr. Simons, good to see you again and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Karim. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. All right, let's start with you, Dr. Simons. If we come to see at what's happened in the latest developments, we're seeing just a few days of the deadline, no extension on the table, and Defense Strategy Haxith says, or Defense Secretary, Haxith is saying U.S. forces are locked and loaded to resume strikes on Iranian infrastructure. The naval blockade as well remains in full force. Now, from your perspective, what do you think this is going to lead to?
Well, it's actually Secretary of War is Hegseth's title, and he is the same person who thought that the Pulp Fiction line, this prayer, was part of the something biblical. So one can see that he's already quite delusional. And he has been one of the consistent ones to support this war. And quite frankly, Trump has already almost thrown him under the bus a couple of times, but he has always supported this war. He is one who talks about different bluster about what he will do, talks in hyperbole. I get the impression that he is wanting to continue this war, and his rhetoric and his track record so far support this, because, Iranians are quite clear that if there are breaches, which the enforced US blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, that's a breach, plus also Israel's continued violence, ethnic cleansing, genocide in West Asia and Gaza and southern Lebanon continue. These are all breaches. These are bad faith by these two, who have a track record of not only breaking ceasefires, but making sneak attacks under the cover of diplomatic negotiations, as well as hitting civilian targets. So I have no doubt at all that Hegseth, Secretary of War, wishes to continue the different path of war crimes and acts of aggression that they have already started.
So, Dr. Simons, you think this is merely a tactical pause that allows perhaps both sides to position themselves while the underlying confrontation continues?
Absolutely. You just see the air traffic going from the United States to its various bases in West Asia, what's left of them at least. This is what they're doing. They think that somehow they can get an advantage by restocking. But as Iran said, and they understand this, that you'll just burn through your missiles as quickly as, because they're being forced to take assets from South Korea and so forth to try and bolster Israel's defenses by the same weapon systems that have failed. They've proven themselves to be a failure in what their intended use and function is, such as these interceptors. So, and of course, Iran is also using this because they understand that the ceasefire will not hold, because the underlying conditions, namely Netanyahu's desire to break Iran, and the fact that Donald Trump is just doing what he is told. The Islamabad discussions, where you have J.D. Vance on the phone to Netanyahu already is a pretty big red flag.
So if this is a pause, and you did mention, something about it briefly, but perhaps to dive deeper, if this is a pause, Dr. Simons, who is going to gain from this more right now? Iran with its calibrated pressure on Hormuz, or the U.S. trying to manage a fractured, let's say, political base?
Well, the different factors, the configuration of power and projection remains the same. The US is desperate. I mean, Netanyahu whispered sweet somethings in Trump's ear, and Trump believed him that this could be won in a couple of days. He's proven wrong again. So the US and Israel, it's a desperate act to try and somehow turn the tables with this pause. Well, of course, it would change nothing. It'll be further humiliation once more, which has been shown since the 28th of February. I mean, you hear some of these different assessments, and most of them agree that there is going to be a continuation that Iran will be prevailing, because both Israel and the US require an outright military victory to win this so-called war, and that would require land forces, and neither of them have sufficient land force power projection to actually do that, because they would require, according to basic military convention, at least 3 million troops initially to do that. They don't have this. Iran just needs to not lose, and they're playing a much smarter strategy. I mean, you just listen, to these military commentators, or even Brennan, former head of the CIA, said live on TV that he does not believe a thing that Trump says, and that Iran is a more credible communicator at this stage.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simon. So we see this question of intent versus optics. Let's turn now to the Washington side of the equation. And here, let's talk to Professor Sierra Knock. So you technically know the Trump political operation intimately, and the president is saying the conflict is, and I quote, very close to being over, and that Iran wants to make a deal very badly. Yet, simultaneously, the Pentagon maintains maximum pressure and threatens airstrike. Iran's parliamentary speaker just said the president made 7 claims in an hour. All 7 were false. So how sustainable is this negotiating strategy when we have one side fundamentally rejecting the other's version of reality?
Well, I would say the negotiating strategy hasn't changed. The military pressure has increased each time Iran tried to extend the talks, delay, or reject U.S. demands and go back on agreements. The U.S. posture has stayed remarkably stable, though, from the beginning, back when we were negotiating with the now deceased Iranian regime leaders in January and February. They rejected U.S. demands, tried to play games about the location of the talks and delay tactics, and President Trump sent the Armada as a warning. They didn't heed the warning, and President Trump used the Armada and deployed U.S. air power to decimate Iran and take out the unreasonable leaders. Now what we're facing since the war has progressed so successfully is a fractured regime in Iran, which issues public statements that don't always match their private negotiations. President Trump and his team understand this, and they've been gracious on this issue. But the Iranians may be coming up on a limit here because, when they go back on their agreements, because today President Trump called the Secretary of War and the Vice President to the Situation Room.
Now, if this strategy, Professor Knock, if the pressure is the strategy, where are the tangible results? Are we any closer to a deal on uranium or the Strait of Hormuz than we were 2 weeks ago?
Well, I understand why the term coercive diplomacy has been used, but I don't think it fully captures what President Trump is doing here. Because at each point, he's given the Iranian leaders the chance to make their own choice, agree to U.S. demands and live or die with their fanatical leaders. Many chose to survive and negotiate, which is actually progress. So in a sense, it can't be called coercive as the Iranians made their choice. But we're currently dealing with leaders who made a choice to negotiate, which I think was the right decision. And ultimately, the uranium and the Strait will be handled, I have no doubt, even if we must resume military operations. But this wasn't a failure. We've never had Iranian leaders who were willing to meet at such high levels with the vice president of the United States before. And we learned a great deal about this leadership, which can serve as a framework to work off of with the next set of leaders, if these ones happen to be eliminated. Additionally, as the Department of War has repeatedly laid out, Israel and the United States have degraded the Iranian threat for decades to come. And as well as the internal suppression mechanisms that the regime uses, which will benefit the Iranian people at the appropriate time in the future. And we've also strengthened alliances in the Middle East and revealed the true nature of this Iranian regime, which is that neutrality doesn't protect anyone from their chaotic aggression. So this has led to strengthened security, defense partnerships across the Gulf states, and they've never been more unified. And this will support security for decades to come.
Thank you, Professor Nak. And now let's widen the lens a little bit beyond Washington and Tehran to the country that actually brought them to the same negotiating table, that is Pakistan. And here, Dr. Irfan Raja, Pakistan has emerged as the unlikely broker, hosting the highest level U.S.-Iran engagement since 1979. You wanted this discussion before we talked privately about the media narrative. So let's start from there. Western coverage has largely framed this as a surprise, but given Pakistan's historical ties to both the Gulf and Iran, isn't this actually a predictable, even inevitable diplomatic role, let's say? And how would you assess the narrative that Islamabad is merely a venue rather than a shaper of outcomes?
Well, thank you very much. It's a very significant question. And I would start with offering you a bit of background for the viewers and audience here. Of course, Pakistan has very strong and close relationship with Gulf countries and Iran, particularly the next door neighbor. The first president of Pakistan was married to an Iranian lady. Then we have Prime Minister Bhutto, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He married to a very wealthy and influential Iranian lady. So you know that still today the Pakistanis have very close ties with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman and other Gulf countries. There are around approximately 5 million Pakistanis work there, and they are contributing to the Gulf countries' economy and all that. Having said, going back to Pakistan's role as a mediator, it's not the first time actually. If you go back to the history and just touch upon briefly, Pakistan had this opportunity to act as a negotiator. For instance, Pakistan then President General Yahya Khan, he facilitated back-channel contacts that led to U.S. President Richard Nixon's historic 1972 visit to China, and that paved the way for establishing diplomatic ties between China and America. So later, the Pakistan role in negotiation as a negotiator between America and Russia in Afghanistan and in Qatar that stopped the war actually in Afghanistan. So that's not new when we talk about Pakistan's role as a negotiator. And you have to consider a country that is a frontline state on war on terror lost over $150 billion, and most importantly, sacrifices over 100,000 lives on U.S. war on terror. So a country that still continues to bleed knows the value of peace, So that's why on that end, Pakistanis are very serious. Whatever the result will be, obviously, the big deal is their victory is like they brought both parties for the first time since 1979, as our guest said as well, on a higher level into Islamabad, which itself is a victory. Going back to the second part is the Western-like media. I would say sections of the Western media, because I always say media is polemic and there are all sorts of voices within that media. Talking about the Indian media narrative, that's been challenged from inside and to a point that is being seen as a joke. About Western media, it's not a surprise because this is based on, rooted in Orientalism, like we the Western are the best and the other people are the backward and uneducated and all that. But despite all these, happenings, there is still hope, and Pakistan is actively shaping outcomes of these talks because it's simply not a facilitator, as you said. It has leverage on the countries, and it's backed by China, backed by Saudi Arabia as partners, Turkey. So to say that these talks will just end, as in we still hope the second round, and in politics is everything is possible. So to say, and particularly the last thing is, you see, both sides are after the first round, they were, the many critics were saying that there was a point that hopes were dying, but still we have hope going into the second round. So I see there is a lot of hope there.
Mm-hmm. And this brings us to the central pressure point of this entire crisis, the world's most critical energy choke point, Hormuz, which is shut again. And here, Dr. Gregory Simons, the whiplash we saw in the last 24 hours is extraordinary. The Strait opens, oil plunges 10%, Wall Street rallies, and then Tehran reverses the course and reimposing strict management and accusing the US of piracy. Iran's speaker said the rules of the Strait will be determined by the facts on the ground, not by social media. So is this calibrated coercion designed to extract leverage without triggering war, or is Tehran genuinely preparing for a prolonged closure that could tip the global economy into recession?
Well, they understand that Donald Trump is not a man of his word, and he never has been. I mean, this is why increasingly the moniker that demented Don, this person who at one stage presented himself as Jesus Christ in this self-generated meme before the predictable backlash, and he deleted it from his Truth Social. But this goes into the mindset of that person who refers to himself as Jesus Christ, which is an affront not only to Christians but Muslims as well, because Jesus is central to both religions, and attacking the Pope. So this is a guy who's out of control, who increasingly there is a call for the 25th Amendment that he be removed from office owing to his degenerated mental state. So Iran understands this. I mean, they are a much more rational actor. He has not lived up to his bargain, which is no surprise. One of the conditions, you can't enforce a naval blockade during a truce or a ceasefire, because that is a breach of it. And I mean, Trump has repeatedly lied in the past, because if we remember back in February that he said no agreement had been reached with Iran, and this is why he was attacking. And the Omani foreign minister said, yes, Iran gave unprecedented concessions. So this is a track record of lying, deceiving, or he's just that far out of touch mentally that he doesn't know between what is truth and what is fiction. And yeah, I mean, this is a reminder that there are actually consequences for actions. I mean, it's like trying to teach a toddler the word no, and that this has consequences. I mean, Trump is admittedly a very slow learner, and this is Iran showing that it still holds the leverage. Because if we remember, even during the Islamabad talks, that he tried that social media stunt. He tried to sail a couple of naval vessels through the Straits of Hormuz while the talks were ongoing, just to show what a wonderful guy he is, like he's on the set of The Apprentice. He's in charge and everyone does what he tells them.
And Dr. Gregory, if we are looking at what is happening in the market, do you think this is going to be something like short-term volatility, or are we looking at a systematic shock to global energy security that lasts for months?
I mean, this is going to be longer than a short-term one because this has gone on for a while. And also we need to keep in mind this is not only about energy, but it's also about fertilizer and other aspects. So if we look even beyond this, I mean, the growing season is already underway in the Northern Hemisphere, and they don't have the stuff that they need. So you not only have energy security issues, you have food security issues. But Donald Trump doesn't care. He wants to look good. This is about Trump first, and well, maybe before Trump first, Netanyahu first, and he doesn't care about. This is what he's demonstrated. Anyone else's predicament.
So technically, we have a ceasefire in name, according to your views, Dr. Gregory Simons, but pressure is building on every front, the military, the diplomatic and economic one, and you did mention the food security as well. And this leads me to the next question to Dr. Yvonne Ridley, who I welcome to the debate. Sorry for the technical issue, Dr. Yvonne. Thank you for agreeing to be with us.
Thank you.
That's first and foremost. So we were discussing the gap between what President Donald Trump says and what Iran says, which is now becoming some kind of a chasm. Trump claims Iran agreed to transfer its 440 kilograms of enriched uranium to the United States. Tehran's response, Iran's enriched uranium is as sacred to us as Iranian soil. And the quote, this isn't a minor miscommunication, it's a fundamental disconnect on the core subject of negotiation. So is this simply Trump's negotiating theatrics for a domestic audience, or does this gap really reveal a deeper dysfunction that makes any real deal impossible?
Well, we all know that Donald Trump has a long-distance relationship with the truth. Is the kindest thing that I can say. And this emerged when he claimed he'd won the 2020 election, stating it was rigged and stolen. And the truth was that the election was certified by all 50 states, and numerous legal challenges were rejected, including by the Supreme Court. And his own Attorney General stated that there was no evidence of widespread fraud. And then we had the continual lies about the coronavirus later that year. And he, I don't know whether he's just stupid or whether he's just a serial liar. But you cannot believe a word he's saying. And when you get the mainstream media going to fact check with the Tehran government in preference to the Trump administration, you realize that this man, supposedly the most powerful man in the world, has absolutely zero credibility. And it would be mildly amusing if it weren't for the fact that he has blood on his hands, because he has caused wars, he has caused so much disruption, He has threatened Iran in an illegal way, threatening to blow up every bridge, which is a war crime. I don't know who his advisors are, but, he is just so poorly informed. And as I say, this long distance relationship he has with the truth is his, the reputation is growing by the hour. This is a man who just cannot tell the truth, whether it's because he doesn't know any better or whether it's because he thinks that he's still playing this apprentice game, this reality TV show. It's hard to tell. But I also think that he is seriously ill. He isn't looking himself. He's incoherent. He's slurring over his speeches. And we know that he doesn't drink. So he can't blame that on alcohol. He just, he's not a well man, but he is now in his 80s, I believe. So really, I'm not sure that he's competent.
But amidst what's happening, Dr. Ivan, do you think diplomacy can survive? But we have parties, the two parties that cannot even agree on what is being discussed.
Well, I think it's ludicrous to suggest that the Iranians would give up their enriched uranium. They just wouldn't make that. It doesn't make any sense at all. This is not a country that is going to produce a nuclear weapon. There is a fatwa in existence that says that nuclear weapons are haram or forbidden in Iran, and this is a belief that has been carried through from the last three ayatollahs. Despite all the exhaustive searches and weapons inspectors, there is no evidence to say that Iran is preparing a nuclear weapon. The only person who has started that rumor is the real serial liar of Benjamin Netanyahu, who again is someone else who can't tell the truth. And since 1982, Benjamin Netanyahu has told anyone who will listen that Iran is months away from developing a nuclear weapon. And he's been saying that since the 80s. And the IAEA inspectors have been to Tehran and they have checked the facilities, the enrichment program that they've got, and there is no evidence. There is nothing to say that Iran is producing a nuclear weapon. So I think that really we have to accept that the US president is a fool who is in the pay or sway or the Epstein influence under the Israelis. And the Israelis couldn't tell the truth if someone put a gun to Netanyahu's head. It's just not in their nature to be transparent. And, you know, this is a country which does have nuclear weapons, which refuses to acknowledge it has nuclear weapons, and certainly refuses any sort of inspection on its nuclear facilities. So there's the people who've been caught out lying are the Israelis and the Trump administration.
And this
And these are the key takeaways.
Thank you, Dr. Ivan. And this actually creates the wide gap, which keeps widening actually internationally, at least between the two parties. But there is also a parallel divide opening up in the United States. And for this, I would like to get back to Professor Cyranok. We're seeing what some call a MAGA mutiny, a report, and we have seen a lot of news like Tucker Carlson accusing the president of breaking his America First pledge. Alex Jones as well says Donald Trump is in free fall. That's how he put it. And polling shows 61% of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of this war. And you've been yourself inside that political machine. How serious is this fracture, according to you, within the MAGA coalition? And with midterms looming, is the Iran policy becoming perhaps an electoral liability that could cost Republicans control of the Congress?
Well, it's a good question. I would first say the MAGA divide, or so-called, is mostly led by fringe podcasters, some of whom you mentioned, and these are not people necessarily in the know. But there is a valid concern about the failure of the about the upcoming midterms due to the economy and the gas prices. But I would say that the failure is in the messaging, not President Trump's national security strategy, because we often forget how badly President Biden damaged the world order by allowing rogue regimes like Iran to grow with unchecked power. President Trump was voted in because the American people wanted security, whether that be at the border or on terrorism or on nuclear weapons. So what you're seeing isn't a full-blown fracture. It's a debate about how to interpret America First, not a total rejection of it. But I think the president, was elected, this Iran policy is something that he's mentioned throughout his campaign. And it actually falls under the same priorities he's laid out, which is protecting Americans. So reminding people to take pride in our military strength and seeing America become an energy superpower, providing the world with oil and gas again, are actually positives for voters. And I think once the Iran conflict is resolved, that the voters will be left with pride and not fear. But the timing and the messaging is really key for this to turn into a political victory.
But Professor Cyranok, are you saying that there is no internal backlash actually happening?
Well, there is some, but I think, in American national security decisions are the domain of the president. So we vote somebody in, we're entrusting them to make these national security decisions throughout their term. And President Trump's policy is fundamentally about stopping nuclear weapons from falling into the hands of rogue terrorists, which is good for Americans, but also the world. And his next move will depend entirely on how Iran responds. So I think, the backlash or the divide that we see, it also depends on how Iran responds and what President Trump needs to do next.
Thank you indeed. And now let's move on to perhaps from the political battlefield to the information battlefield, one where the casualties are real. And here we might talk about what is happening in Gaza, which is not separate from the war in the Middle East. Dr. Irfan Raja, you specifically raised this issue. Where is Gaza in this equation? Where is the freedom of speech? Whoever says truth will be killed or labeled anti-Semitic. UN human rights experts have decried a deliberate strategy to silence critical reporting. And here we're not talking about the at least 122 journalists who have been killed since October 7th in the Gaza Strip, and many clearly identifiable in press vests. Also, journalists are being perhaps forbidden from reporting the truth in what's happening, for example, in Tel Aviv itself just to kind of cover the real casualty from this war. Now, we have, for example, Al Jazeera correspondent Mohammed Wishah, who was killed in a drone strike on his vehicle. And amidst all this, how do you analyze the relationship between the systematic targeting of journalists in Gaza and the broader information war being waged alongside the military campaign?
This is a fundamentally important question because if we remember John Pilger, the British journalist, he mentioned a phrase, he coined a phrase like slow news, obviously used by many academics and all that. So Gaza is a slow news these days. You have peace talks going on, and the world is not knowing what is happening in Venezuela, what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in Ukraine. So this, and you're perfectly right to point out that in every war, actually, this reminds us of another writer, Philip Knightley, his book, The First Casualty. So the first casualty is truth, obviously. And these all killings are deliberate, skillfully designed, to cover up the Israeli ongoing genocide. I would call it Holocaust, because not me, many Jewish mainstream professors have called it, by all means. And, there's the use of anti-Semitism. It has come to a point when many of the leading figures, I'm sure your guests would agree with that, Professor Kent Roth, many others, they see it as a weapon. Every time you raise up a point, you challenge the official rhetoric, the immediate answer would be like, you are anti-Semitic. There are scores of videos available on YouTube. There are scores of examples of this, and unfortunately, the truth is dying actually, and that is why Israel is on the World Freedom Ranking is dropped down to 118. So you see, and which is still, I believe, those who ranked is still sympathetic somehow. Otherwise, it's in the last point. So you see, there is always a consequence of speaking truth. And your guest, especially Dr. Rehan, really knows as a journalist, as a top writer here. In Britain, for example, many people, when I use people, I'm including all academics, journalists, campaigners, activists, media activists, they have lost their job. That's not an illusion, it's a fact actually. And there are lots of examples. I give you a quick example of, if you allow me, I don't know how much time I have. In Britain, for example, the average person remember the story of Tony Blair's wife, Sherry Blair. She was being, forced to apologize in the middle of the night because she accepted that Palestinian suicide bombers may have driven by lack of hope about their future. In the same vein, a prominent British politician, Jeremy Corbyn, he has went through all sorts of, challenges because he's been labeled as anti-Semite. Many others. But on the other hand, there are people that they are openly Islamophobic, and they have said it. It's all documented. But no one challenged to point out that why you are Islamophobic. So because many journalists they have accepted in Britain and in America, and many cases, with scores of example. Of course, the time is short. In BBC Hard Talk, the former UK parliamentarian George Galway, for example, he disclosed inequalities in reporting on Israel-Palestine issue, and he was giving examples like, for example, Andrew Gilligan. Actually, when he told the truth, he got sacked, and a man who backed him, Greg Dye, the Director General of the BBC then, he stood by him and he got sacked. Then we have Gavin Davis stood by his DG, got sacked. Piers Morgan in the Mirror got sacked. So this list is long, it's simultaneously in US as well. So people know the moment you talk the truth, the moment you talk of, even you mention the word genocide or Holocaust, you will be the first one to lose the job. And lastly, I remember my one professor during we were doing, our master's thesis, one of the leading British figures, Professor Phil Taylor, He then told the PhD students, like, be careful in choosing the language when you talk about, the Middle East and mention Israel, because you know the consequences. So the freedom of speech or freedom in media is just an illusion. And I'm not the only one. I'm sure your guests and other several leading figures, they agree with this because we see it every day. Yeah.
And since you mentioned Dr. Yvonne Ridley being a journalist who has reported in the Middle East for decades, let me redirect this question to you, Dr. Yvonne. So what does the relative silence of major Western media outlets on these killings tell us about the state of press freedom when the victims are not only Palestinians or Arab in the region, but we have seen incidents where even Western, journalists were killed?
Well, Israel has absolutely no respect for journalists or journalism, and that is quite clear. Even today, some of the most right-wing journalists are not being allowed into Gaza to report on what is happening on the ground because inevitably war crimes have been committed. Anybody with a smartphone can see the war crimes that have been committed. And unfortunately, while Israel holds the Americans under political occupation, they are also occupying most of the mainstream media who are too scared to report the truth or are too influenced by Israel to report the truth. I'm talking about the Murdoch media. Rupert Murdoch controls or influences at least 180 newspaper titles around the world. And unfortunately, these have become propaganda sheets. And journalists are being deliberately targeted. Independent journalists are being deliberately targeted. It's a dangerous occupation to tell the truth in the current climate. And the fear isn't coming from the usual corners. We're told that journalists have a difficult time in Russia and Iran, but no other country in the world has assassinated, targeted, murdered as many journalists as Israel has. More than 250 of my colleagues in Palestine have paid the blood price for nothing more than trying to deliver the truth. And the truth is key here. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu last year in his speech to the UN General Assembly said 8 big lies, but the media were too afraid to contradict his speech because people are afraid. They're afraid of being called anti-Semitic. And you heard from the previous speaker how some people in positions of power have been hounded out of office using the label of anti-Semitism. And now people have reached a stage where they can see through these tissues of lies. And to be called anti-Semitic today is pretty meaningless. It's become devalued, and when you get former Holocaust survivors standing up and calling out the anti-Semitism, you realize that something is seriously wrong among the top people in office. And every now and again, we get the Epstein files cropping up, and President Trump has appeared in the Epstein files thousands and thousands of times. 38 women have been paid off so far who've accused the President of the United States of rape. All 38, as I say, have been paid off by Trump, who says this is no admission of guilt. Well, it's a bit like Prince Andrew in Britain, who gave $12 million to a woman who he claimed he'd never met. Mm-hmm. Well, I've never met Prince Andrew, but I haven't got that money. You know, we need complete transparency. And when you get world leaders like Trump accused of paedophilia and rape and abuse of women, that is something that is not going to go away. In fact, I am amazed that any woman could work in that office under a man who has such a cloud and refuses to be transparent about what the Epstein files were all about. Of course, we know it was a huge Mossad operation, and the only purpose of all those videos and documentation was to use as blackmail, as leverage on the people who had compromised themselves with these young girls. And this was an industrial scale exercise involving thousands of young girls. And yet the only person so far who has been convicted is a woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of a Mossad agent and a newspaper owner, Robert Maxwell.
Thank you, Dr. Yvonne. Beyond the battle of narratives, which we can have many from different sides, depending on their background and what they are trying to hide or put focus on, there are very real, very tangible economic consequences rippling across the globe. And when I say across the globe, I'm not just talking about Europe or the global south. Dr. Gregory Simons, there might be perhaps among the political elite disagreement whether there is a real divide in the United States or not. But then let's talk about global economic impact that can also touch the average American citizen. When we hear reports, for example, the EIA, which raised its 2026 Brent forecast to $96 per barrel, analysts are warning of physical shortages in Europe and the US within weeks if the Strait of Hormuz remains restricted. The administration is pursuing two contradictory goals: maintaining a blockade that constricts supply while claiming to protect American consumers from inflation. Now, how sustainable is this policy, and who ultimately absorbs the shock if this strict management, between two inverted commas, of the strait continues beyond the ceasefire deadline?
Well, I think the diehard MAGA supporters at the level of the ordinary citizen begin to understand the cost of supporting Donald J. Trump, who they elected not about nuclear limitations, but about no more wars, and especially no more endless wars, which he has brought them into. And ultimately, the price is going to continue to go up. I mean, as you note, he's saying that he's all about allowing the free flow of energy products, but at the same time, absolutely adamant about maintaining a blockade, which is contradictory to that. But this is coming into what Yvonne and I have been saying, that Donald Trump is not a well man psychologically. I mean, he's in deep cognitive decline, and you can see this. I mean, he is lost, and of course, he is also in a position where, if there is transparency, there will be accountability for Trump. and this is the last thing he wants. And so these prices, they're going to continue to go up because of the actions of Trump, while he tries to play out these ridiculous slogans, such as peace through strength and all of this garbage which he's been feeding those on the reality TV show lines. I mean, Trump's messaging at this point makes Baghdad Bob look like a wizard in terms of strategic messaging, because Trump's messages do not add up. They are contradictory, and he's emotionally, psychologically, absolutely unstable. Anyone who contradicts him immediately gets a tirade, even if they're viewing as contradicting him. I mean, just look at what he's unloaded on the Pope, Leo XIV, just as tirade. And I mean, these people who used to support him, and these are not marginal, as someone has said. Tucker Carlson has a massive audience, Candace Owens and Alex Jones and others. I mean, the list is just growing, those that are leaving him, and it's leaving him increasingly exposed. And you're getting those who supported him strongly are now some of the advocates which are saying that he needs to be removed from office before he does something even more stupid than exacerbating this world economic calamity. But Donald Trump is a person who can never admit that they are wrong. He will burn the world before he ever would admit he's wrong, and even then he would not admit it. He would prefer to rule over the ashes rather than admit any wrongdoing, because this is how he sees himself, this kind of emperor, this kind of Jesus-like figure, which he posted on Truth Social. I mean, it bodes very well, not very well for the global economy, not only the US economy, but everyone is put in this boat together, because Trump cannot admit he has lost the physical war in Iran, and that he is wrong, and that he has betrayed his voting base massively again.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Gregory Simons. And now let me turn to Professor Sierra Nog. Professor, who breaks first in this economic standoff and the crisis we're seeing? Do you think the energy markets are the ones who are going to break first, or the political resolve of the leaders involved?
Well, as we've discussed, there are global economic consequences, but I believe them to be short term. And the United States can weather them. It's not pleasant, but we're not in a dire circumstance. So I think President Trump's resolve is incredibly strong. I think he maintains the most leverage over Iran that we've ever had. And the Iranian regime, it does not have leverage when it comes to their economic position. Their country is they were in a dire economic situation before this started, due to their leadership funding terrorism instead of funding their people. And it's only gotten worse with the blockades and, other economic consequences. So I think there's got to be somebody in the Iranian leadership who recognizes that, and that they'll see the value in negotiating. And I really hope they make the right decision for their country and for their people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Sierra Nog. As we are nearing the end, I would like to give a very brief intervention from Dr. Irfan Raja. If we're going to talk about Pakistan peace talks and frame them as successful, then what would be the next the peace talks? Will it be on Kashmir, for example?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I would wholeheartedly agree with you, because even though I agree with both of your guests, Dr. Yvonne Ridley and Dr. Gregory, saying that President Trump is not being trusted, But once last year, he was like a mediator between India and Pakistan, a war which Pakistanis have won it, and he promised to Pakistanis that at some point he would like to settle the Kashmir issue, because the Pakistan and India, they have been a front line of war, like on Kashmir issues, starting in the 1948, then 65, 1971. And most recently. So this part of the world, South Asia, is permanently in danger, So we Pakistanis are really looking forward to it, and I mean the ordinary Pakistanis especially. So you're right in pointing it out. Once this peace talk, Iran and America will settle down, the next step would be Kashmir. And having said, just one quick point on your guest in the state, ordinary people in the UK and in America with $38 trillion dollars debt, and the UK with almost 3 trillion pounds debt, and there is homelessness growing. That to say that the upper hand, or I don't buy these thoughts. Believe me, the ordinary people in any Western capital, including South Asia or Global South, they are not interested at all in buying these false rhetorics, government rhetorics, and nobody likes war. War is business for them. Let's hope for the peace. And I have still hope that Pakistan is backed by China, backed by Turkey, backed by Saudi Arabia. So there is potential hope for peace. Because
let's hope for the best, Dr. Irfan. Unfortunately,
because the Americans have lost this war. Thank you.
Thank you. We have reached the end of this special coverage. All my thanks is extended to my panel, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, Professor Sierra Nak, also Dr. Simons Gregory, and to you as well, Dr. Irfan. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we reach the end. So 3 days to go, no extension, pressure rising on every front, military, economic and diplomatic. And with these deadline looming, the ceasefire holds, but only just. The Strait of Hormuz is closed again, the naval blockade continues, and the gaps between the parties remain vast. This is not just a crisis, it is a test of whether diplomacy can function under the weight of maximum pressure. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and until next time, do take care.